Hello everybody, welcome back to another Wainrider Wednesday, the weekly series where we take a look at progress for the upcoming mod Total War Wainriders being built for Rome Total War's Alexander expansion and set during the Third Age, during the period of the Wainrider inventions of the 19th and 20th centuries, which sounds strange to say, but in Middle-earth terms, yeah, that's what we're looking at. So for this one, we're looking at the third Dunedainic faction in the mod. Of course, we have the Kingdom of Gondor, which features very prominently in the south. Probably, in some ways, one of the strongest factions to start the mod, maybe the strongest. We also have the Kingdom of Arnor in the north in a very, very different precarious position. We will be taking a look at them in a little while, but today we're going to be looking at Umbar. Umbar, of course, is in a bit of a strange space in terms of the lore. This was the oldest settlement, I believe, of the Númenóreans. It's been like a few months since I've looked at the lore. Every few months, you know, time passes, you kind of forget stuff, then you have to go back and read it all again. But at one point, I had this all well in my head, trust me. But I believe Umbar was one of the first strongholds established by the Númenóreans. It's certainly one of the oldest ones at any rate. And this one took a while to come under Gondor's influence. I believe it was in the 900s under Teranon. No, it wasn't under Teranon. It was Eärnil the first, something like that. One of the E kings, one of the Sea kings, with the first name that began with the letter E, was the one who took Umbar, if I remember correctly. And since that time, it had been, well, it has existed sort of as the southernmost outpost of Gondor's realm for almost 1,000 years, right? Until the Kinstrife, essentially. And then it regressed into its own independent lordship. We don't, I believe, get any clear indication of what this was called, what this lordship was called, other than that the word lordship is used in Appendix A to refer to Umbar. They established an independent lordship free from the crown of Gondor after the Kinstrife. These are the descendants of Castamir, who is the strongest of the rebels who Eldacar finally killed in, I believe it's the 1200s, maybe the 1400s of the Third Age. But it's been a while, at any rate, by the time that the mod starts, that Umbar has been, or that there have been Corsairs, rather. However, you may know, if you've followed the previous progress on the mod, that the Lordship of Umbar does not actually begin in possession of the settlement of Umbar itself. And you can tell this by the minimap here. We will be taking a look at their starting position on the campaign map. But even from here, you can tell that they've got this strip of land really on both sides of the Harnen mouth, going down into what you might call the northern hinterlands of Umbar. But really, Umbar would be located right around these hills, of course, right around the great landlocked Cape and Firth of Umbar, I believe, as it's described. So they don't even start with any of this territory. Now, this was a design decision. This was based very much on what we could kind of glean from the lore, and unfortunately, Tolkien is not super clear about exactly who owned Umbar when. We have, I believe, talked about this in the Gondor video, so if you want a little more discussion about that, certainly feel free to take a look at that one. Whatever the role of the settlement itself, however, we know that at some point, Umbar does fall back into the hands of Corsairs, men of Harad, and we know that there are Corsairs of Umbar, of course, well into the War of the Ring, and so there existed this population, this group. Maybe it was nothing more than a bunch of ragtag pirates, right? But it's more interesting, and I think you can make the case for it, that it would not simply be a bunch of pirate scum and villains hanging out in the coves here and there. I think the idea of a lordship of Umbar is a very interesting one to play with, and so that's the direction we've gone with the mod, that this is still the remnants of a Dunedainic faction that is seeking to reclaim Umbar and sort of carve out a state for itself in the south that it had held, or that had been in existence since very early times, going way back to the Second Age, of course. So here's, in a nutshell, sort of that stuff that I wrote up, probably in a more eloquent format than what I just tried to speak. But a reminder that what you're going to be looking at here is work in progress stuff, and some of these things are placeholders, like the difficulty factor. We're estimating that these guys are going to be one of the most difficult factions to play in the mod. Not sure if that's exactly how it's going to play out, but we do want them to be fairly difficult. Again, Umbar seemed to play very little role in the machinations of the Wainrider invasions. although there was stuff happening around there, we don't hear of any big sieges or any big maneuvers. So it seems unlikely for a faction like this to suddenly grow into a major world power, right? So we'll probably want to keep things fairly difficult for them. So here's the backstory for Umbar. For half a century, and again, the start date 1864 here, so going back to around 1800, the lords of Umbar have been exiles, exiled even from their place of exile, the great haven of Umbar. It was to Umbar that the sons of Castamir fled after their father was slain by Eldakar at the head of an army out of the wild north. And after the kinstrife, it was to Umbar that the enemies of the king of Gondor would flock, corsairs, Southrons, and those of Dúnedainic blood who would not bow to the descendants of Eldakar. Here the lordship of Umbar grew, independent of Gondor's crown, mighty in ships, ruler of the coasts, challenging the strength of the kings. Here men remember with pride the coming of the great fleet of Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, the humiliation of Sauron, and the mastery of the Númenóreans. If any place can call itself seat of the power of men in Middle-earth, it is Umbar. The lordship has been bereft of its stronghold and refuge for 50 years, ever since the assault of King Telumethar, who stormed Umbar and destroyed the last descendants of Castamir. Ever since, the remnants of the lordship have clung to the coasts and hinterlands, nursing their strength, biding their time. And now Gondor is weak. Now come rumors of a power rising in the east, strong enough to destroy the Northmen and throw back the hosts of Gondor, strong enough even to slay its king in battle, as has not been done for centuries. Now may be the moment to seize the haven, rebuild the fleets, and make Umbar the pride of men once more. So yeah, 1810, I think, is the year of Telumethar's retaking of Umbar, destruction of the city, apparently. It wasn't razed to the ground, but we hear that there was something of a sack. This was a pretty violent retaking, and in that taking of Umbar, we hear that the last descendants of Castamir were slain, I believe. Now, how well would the chroniclers of Gondor know that, right? Would they have perfect knowledge that there weren't any claimants out there? And this lordship of Umbar, could there be some men here who might fabricate such claims for themselves? So that's the kind of messy political situation you can look forward to playing as this faction, and I think it's going to be a really interesting one. But let's jump into the campaign map. That's after all the purpose of these previews. So when you start up a campaign as the Lordship of Umbar, you will be greeted with roughly this scenario. Now, the interesting thing about this is that from the beginning of the campaign, you can see settlement of Umbar here, owned by Gondor at the very beginning of the mod, just out of your reach, having only recently, within living memory, fallen back into the hands of the Kingdom of Gondor. And so, of course, your main quest, your major objective, is going to be to take this thing back. Now, there are several settlements in the area here, so it's not just going to be a matter of taking this one, but of course this is the central prize. Off to the west, you'll need to be invading the Umbar headland, and you'll want to establish a bit of a presence in the east as well. Now, initially, to your east and south of the Harnan, there will be a bit of a buffer zone of rebel territory. Beyond that, of course, we saw in previous videos, you've got the tribes of the Harad. They are not yet organized into the sort of larger kingdom or empire that you would later see in like 4th Age Total War, for example. So you do have a bit of time, but not a lot. At 3 settlements, you are weaker in terms of just number of settlements than the tribes of the Harad. They own more territory. They've got, I think, 4 settlements to your 3. So they can theoretically outproduce you. And also they've got a bit better of a logistical position in the sense that you've got rivers to work around. Now, there are some differences from what you may remember from 4th Age Total War in terms of those river crossings. In 4th Age, there was only one crossing over the Harnan. It was right about here, but now you can see there is another crossing right near the mouth, so that'll make things a lot easier for you, as well as the AI. You will not need to worry about getting boats just to cross, the mouth of the Umbar, or the Harnan River, rather. So you can link up your forces relatively easily. North and east, you will find that I believe Gondor owns a bit of territory in the area to the northeast, or maybe it's Harad who owns something down here. But at any rate, you're not alone north of the Harnan. You've only got the single settlement here currently, and this is not super well developed. As you can tell, it's got some wooden walls. Better than nothing, but still not quite the stronghold that your capital settlement is down here, Karis Nan. So you're going to have, again, some opportunities up here because initially you're going to be surrounded by rebels, and then you're going to be expanding to the point where you can contact, the faction of Gondor in the north and the tribes of Harad in the east. Probably, though, initially you'd do like a holding action up here, right? Because if I were playing as Umbar, my first move is going to be to go straight for Umbar and then sort of clean up everything to the south and west. As we saw in a previous video, there's another settlement or two on the very southern fringe of the map. We've expanded the map slightly in the south, so Umbar is not the last frontier, so to speak. And that's kind of nice. It makes it really the crown jewel in the region as opposed to just a single settlement. So you want to take that and then kind of keep going. Obviously, as the Lordship of Umbar, you're going to make this your major goal, as well as probably, the coastline. If you want to sort of take up that proud naval tradition, or just act more like a corsair, then you'll want to head up the coast, capturing islands, capturing pretty much anything you can. And of course, during your initial strikes, you're going to be aided by the fact that Gondor is going to have its work cut out for it. Of course, Gondor is going to begin the campaign at war with the Wainriders as well, so they will have that to worry about. To their north, they're going to have some other potential threats. They're not in possession of Orthanc and of Aglarond, so those two fortresses they're sort of leasing out to sort of middlemen, protectors, so to speak. And although they will be in an alliance at the beginning of the campaign, that is going to be certainly. The fact that they don't own that territory is to some extent going to block them from going north. And if they do decide to go north, they're going to be basically making more enemies in that way. Otherwise, though, it'll mostly be kind of a three-way contest between you, Gondor, and Harad. The only other player that's in the area that may become involved is Khand, and their initial territories are right around here. So they've got some distance. But the fact that there's a lot more rebel presence in the south in Wainriders means that it's hard for us to predict exactly how this is going to play out in game, especially when we fiddle with things like giving the AI factions various bonuses and penalties depending on which faction the player has selected. This is something you may remember from 4th Age Total War, where the developers of that mod set it up so that you could say you were playing as the Reunited Kingdom, and Rohan would be a little weaker because they're a strong ally of yours, and factions like your traditional enemies, like the Kingdom of Adunabar or Dunland or whatever, would be made stronger because you were playing a faction that would be historically at war with them, and so they wanted to set it up to make things more challenging for the player. So we can do something like that here as well. And that means there's a lot of potential of variability in how these things are going to play out. If you're playing as Umbar, perhaps we'll make Gondor a bit stronger, make the tribes of Harad a bit stronger. But if you're playing as Gondor, then Umbar is probably going to have a stronger presence than when it's in the hands of a player. So things like that we can certainly do. Now, the settlements, of course, in terms of settlement style, are going to some extent, have a bit of a blend, right? Like they've got the sort of the Southron style settlements for some of these, which makes sense because we are in Southron territory. But if you look up here, we've got a Dunedainic style settlement layout in here in Haradland. So in this settlement, we've got the sort of the citadel, the tower there, with the nice sort of black roofed Dunedainic marble looking buildings all laid out. So there's going to be a bit of variety in the settlement style for Umbar, and that's going to depend on sort of where you're building, I guess, or what the initial faction creator of the settlement is held to be in the code. So lots of opportunities there. Umbar is going to be It's always tricky, I think, to sort of design a faction that is primarily seagoing, because, as you know, Rome Total War is not really known for its naval battle mechanics. It doesn't have any, apart from the auto-resolve feature. But I think we've got, a lot of coastland in the area, and by aiding the AI a little bit, by giving them these river crossings, sort of nudging them in certain ways, we can make Umbar a pretty interesting faction to sort of tear up the coasts. And maybe even, if I were playing as Umbar, sort of a long-term goal would certainly to get Pelargir back, right? To make this the capital again of sort of a different strain of Dunedainic kingdom. We'd basically take the coastlands and everything, maybe west, ending around Dol Amroth, or what would later become Dol Amroth, I guess, and maybe go up towards Osgiliath. Although I don't know if I'd even bother with that, as Castamir didn't really care too much about the north, right? He was mostly concerned about Pelargir and the sea, so that seems rather fitting. Well, so I hope you enjoyed this quick look at the Lordship of Umbar, one of the I guess underdog Dunedainic factions in the mod. It's always interesting to see a faction with the kind of heritage and ancestry as this, but in a very tricky position. And it's at a point in their history where even the allegiance to Castamir is something that that doesn't so much exist anymore. So this is going to be something you'll have to fight for. So keep following the channel for other updates. In future ones, we're going to be looking, I guess, back north, back east. We've got a few other factions to take a look at, as well as some other mechanics and updates to the mod that we're going to keep you abreast of. So until the next one, everybody, take care.